As we see historic statues of bigoted leaders fall in America, in virtual spaces like Facebook and Instagram, rampant in social media, we see racism is on the rise. Local headlines hit last week, specifically last Friday and Saturday here in San Jose and Santa Clara County. And as a result, pain followed as the public was alerted of a secret group, a bigoted San Jose police Facebook group. Graphic verbal attacks were tossed like grenades. Posts said, "Black Lives Matter protesters." They went on to say that hijabs should be repurposed as nooses. These quotes captured the spirit of those paid to protect and serve. Imagine that. Current and retired San Jose Police Department logged on the 1070D SJ group posted violent hate speech and foul images. And the prime target were Muslims, Blacks, Latinx, Vietnamese, and people that live in the Lincoln district. As you dig a little deeper and unpack the reality of this mess into the 2019 San Jose Police Department use of force records, we were tied for #1, or the Lincoln district was tied for #1 for the use of excessive force. The scandal is still fresh for the neighborhood, and the impacted community of color wonders, what is next for police reform and public safety in San Jose? Mayor Liccardo, Chief Eddie Garcia, and District Attorney Rosen denounced the bigoted attacks and called for accountability. They all, the mayor, the chief, and district attorney, hold the keys to systemic police and justice reform. After weeks of protests against police brutality and racism in the wake of the lynching of the no-knock murder of Breonna Taylor and the lynching of I Can't Breathe, a knee on my neck, George Floyd, and with the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery running, doing something he loves, we wait for investigations, for true action. We wait for the firing of racist and bigoted cops. The mayor cited his 9-point plan as a solution. The chief put 4 current involved officers involved on paid leave as the police investigate the police. The DA's office said it will call the Conviction Integrity Unit to review all cases related to the officers. The impacted community wants accountability and answers. For now, they are left with fear. Should they even call the police, or should they call to defund the police? Packed, its 30+ congregations and faith community, and over 100 faith leaders stand together to call for equity and justice for all. In the spirit of Martin Luther King's justice, today we listen to understand as authentic civic leaders share how moral courage can change Santa Clara County. Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Ray. I am the executive director of PACT, which is People Acting in Community Together in Silicon Valley. We are a multi-faith, multicultural organizers who develop leaders to speak truth to power. We demand for equal justice for all, and we call to fire all racist police. And we stand to protect the vulnerable. We push mayors, county supervisors, and public officials to get on board to denounce structural racism in policing, criminal justice, and public affairs. And we demand access to alternatives to public safety, restorative justice, and a moratorium on over-policing people of color. So everyone in our county, in our cities of Santa Clara County, gets to thrive and enjoy the same quality of life. So right now, I want to take the time to welcome our panel. Panel, how are you guys doing today?
Great.
Very good. So I'll start with Maha. Maha, if you can just introduce yourself, tell us what organization you're affiliated with, and give us an idea of what's fueling you, what's giving you fire in this moment today.
Thank you so much, Reverend Ray, and I'm really happy to be speaking with the other panelists with me. I run an organization called the Islamic Networks Group, which has been around for about 27 years. And we started out as an organization that primarily teaches Americans about Islam and Muslims, and have grown since to expand that work to do that with pluralism, and then also intercultural pluralism, where we look at Islamophobia in relation to other forms of bigotry. And we have very deep roots in the Bay Area and around the country where we have affiliates. Did you want me to speak about the Facebook page as well, Ray?
Well, we could get to it. But what's fueling you right now? Tell us what's fueling you, what's driving you and motivating you in this moment.
I'm on vacation. I'm on vacation. I'm sitting in Tahoe, and but I wanted to join you today because I feel like it's an incredibly important conversation. You know, I'm very reflective about these issues. I'm a spiritual person. I'm a practicing Muslim, and so I think through these things from a very spiritual, religious lens, which I think is what you will hear also in response to some of the questions that you might ask. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Maha, and thank you for the moral courage. And we look forward to the spiritual insightfulness. And that the Facebook question is going to be one of the first questions. I'm going to come back to you after our introduction.
Okay. Sure.
Next on the panel, we have Kalila Spain. Welcome, Kalila. Can you introduce yourself and where you're from in relation to the work that you're doing, and what is driving you during this period of pandemic?
Yes, Reverend Montgomery, thanks so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm actually a deputy district attorney for Santa Clara County. I've been here for 6+ years. Before that, I was a deputy district attorney in Alameda County. And so I've been in the Bay Area, went to school at Santa Clara University. So I've been here for about 14+ years, but originally, it may come out, I'm actually born and raised in North Carolina. So I'm actually a Southern girl at heart still. And you can kind of see the UNC Tar Heels, which is my alma mater. And what really fuels me during this time that's going on is family. I think anytime there's stress, when you have your family, when you have your friends to rely on. So with the sheltering in place and the kids home, we spend a lot of time together, but I'm constantly having more conversations with my grandparents, with my cousins, with my nieces and nephews, and my aunts and uncles, because I find that being home, I am able to schedule things a lot better and to touch base. And I actually feel more connected to my family and my friends now than I did when I was actually working outside of home.
Very nice, and welcome. Listen, we welcome the Southern Satwa Fair because I'm from Florida, Tallahassee, Florida, which is more like Tallahassee, Georgia. So every now and then we can let our dialect fall.
Yeah, there may be some y'alls in there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Next on our docket, we have Sajid Khan. Sajid, go ahead and tell us about yourself, the work that you do, and what's giving you fuel during this pandemic time.
Sure. Thank you all for having me. My name is Sajid Khan. I'm a Bay Area born and raised. For the first 14 years of my life, I was raised in Milpitas, right here near San Jose, and then moved to San Jose when I was in high school. Have been here in the Bay essentially all my life. Went to UC Berkeley, and then for college, UC Hastings for law school. I've been a deputy public defender here back in my hometown of San Jose since 2008, so about 12 years, actually 12 years as of this week. June 30th of 2008 is when I started as a public defender here in San Jose. I'm currently with the Santa Clara County Alternate Defender's Office, where I represent people charged of homicide crimes. In my free time, I like to write on a blog called Closing Arguments. It's a Tumblr website. Some of the gets published in various forums, so locally and nationally. And I also co-host a podcast and telling the stories. In terms of what's fueling me right now through the pandemic.
Oh no.
I would say faith. I'm born and raised as, I would say, family. I've been enjoying this time with my two sons here at the house, and then working to promote the humanity of people of color and marginalized communities in our country, and specifically people that are ensnared in the criminal legal system, the people that I represent, that my office represents, and trying to utilize this moment in time in our country to demand and work towards systemic change, specifically within the criminal legal system, so that this time in our country is different than in years past, where we've seen movement, but we ultimately, unfortunately, see similar outcomes. So I'm fueled by making this moment count. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome all three of you to this moment. This pandemic has brought out the best and the worst of us. From our first show, one of our panelists, Reverend Joy, said it would be a shame that much is lost during this pandemic. So there is an investment that I do believe we can glean and harvest in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of death, in the midst of the virus, and in the midst of the rising levels of hatred that, unfortunately, our national leadership is a major proponent of causing. So let's get right to it. First, I'd like to just say a quick prayer and a moment of silence for those who have lost their life to COVID, and those who have lost their life to just this environment that we're in of white supremacy, racism, and bigotry, and hate. So I open this time of reflection and sharing and listening, giving thanks. Thanks for the panelists, thanks for their families. Through our many faiths and different faiths, we celebrate one thing that brings us together, which is love, which is family and community. It is my hope and desire that as we share together, we grow closer together in knowing. And even in the difference in the times of tension and difference, we find purpose in that it does not cause separation, but there is an attraction and a need to grow and continue in conversation. So it's in this space that I ask these blessings and give thanks. So in the name of all things of love, we begin this discussion. Ashe, Amin, Shalom, and Assalamu alaikum. Let us dive right in. All right, Maha, this question right off the bat is for you. And Kalila and Sajid, you can follow up. The bigoted San Jose Police Department Facebook group, its scandal, has emotions running high right now. Maha, please share your feelings and the scandal's impact on your community, the Muslim community.
Yeah. So my personal response to the bigoted Facebook page is one of real sadness at how deeply ignorant some people are, not only of Islam, but more generally people who are different from them, and how deeply troubled and sick the perpetrators must also be to actually mock or express so much hatred of others, as much as was done and was openly expressed in these posts. So I feel nothing but sadness and pity for these people. How they talked about people who are different from them, who are other human beings like them, flesh and blood, reflects, in my view, a deep spiritual sickness that I hope they get help from either their pastors, their preachers, or psychologists if they don't have them. As for Muslim American communities, which mostly consist of Arabs, Asians, and African Americans, the posts represent a real threat of harm and violence against us, and why the offending police officers should be immediately removed from the force before they hurt anyone if they haven't already. This isn't about freedom of speech. If you're a service professional carrying weapons that can kill people, continuing to keep them on the force works against everything law enforcement stands for: to serve and protect and bring about peace in the community. The perpetrators at this time are incapable of serving and protecting whole segments of the San Jose population. And keeping them on also reflects very city and all the good work that has been done by people like me, by our council members, by our county board of supervisors, to make our city and county a beloved regional community that is welcome to everyone of diverse background. We shouldn't all have to pay for the mistakes of a few bad apples. And this is why I would implore Chief Garcia, DA Jeff Rosen, to immediately remove these people from the force. It's not enough to suspend. In any other type of work, they would have been fired. I'm not sure why they're not yet. Mm-hmm.
Right. The competency and the integrity of the job, I think if any four of us here violated one principle relational to the work that we do, we would be fired immediately. Sajid, go ahead and give me some impact and insight based on what we've experienced this past weekend.
Yeah, first, as I noted during my introduction, I want to speak as a resident of San Jose, someone who has lived here my whole life and someone who lives here now. It's deeply disappointing that we as a city have fostered this type of environment within our police department that would result in the openly bigoted and hateful and ugly comments of these police officers. It's very disturbing that in the city where my mother, my sister, the mother of my children, all who wear the headscarf, live and drive and shop and work, that they are being policed by police officers who espouse these types of views and look at them as subhuman. But unfortunately, it's not surprising to me to see these views. I think they are simply the latest manifestation of a systemic, cultural, deep-rooted, racist culture, as I just alluded to, in policing generally across our country, historically in our country, and it's not surprising to me to see that manifest here in the Bay Area. We're not immune to that cultural and systemic racism that permeates our police departments and our system of policing dating back hundreds of years. To see these types of bigoted comments directed towards Muslim women, I don't think we should see them in a vacuum. We have to recognize that these comments and these feelings are simply the latest manifestation of a culture of racism that previously and currently is directed at Black men and Black women in our communities, that are directed at Latino men and women in our communities. To me, when I'm as a public defender and I'm representing primarily a largely Latino client population, many of whom are often accused of gang crimes out from East San Jose, many of whom are subject to what I believe to be racist gang policing, they're all on the same continuum. The policing that is enacted and inflicted upon Latino young men in East San Jose it's on the same continuum of these police officers espousing these views towards Muslim women and people in this District Lincoln and things like that. So I don't think this is a problem of a few bad apples. I think this is a systemic cultural problem across our country, and that is just manifesting and being exposed here in San Jose, and is a call. These words are a call for action for us to really demand systemic, wide-ranging change, and is also indicative of the fact that our San Jose Police Department, that again fosters these types of these types of views shall not and should not be trusted with the massive budget that our city and our citizens have entrusted them with. It's simply a violation of trust, and it can no longer exist as it has for years. So it's a moment to defund police departments and to rethink how we police our communities here in San Jose.
Definitely time. Thank you, Sajid. Definitely time to rethink and reimagine, opposed to just creating a new system. Kalila, you are a woman, you are a mother, you are a wife. Give your perspective and insight on this past weekend here in San Jose with the Facebook group.
Yes, yes, I am all three. I've been my whole life, and my husband is also Black, and so it was sickening, to say the least. Anytime I see any instances of racism, racist posts, especially by police officers, it feels like there's a rock, you know, in the pit of my belly. This is unwarranted. It is disgusting, and it needs to be handled swiftly. Because as a DA, we do work with police officers, which is why we're definitely investigating through our conviction integrity unit, investigating these posts and whoever or whomever was involved. But definitely as just a mother, a wife, and a female, and a person in this community, I definitely want to feel safe. And I think everyone wants to feel safe. People of color, people of different religions, all ethnicities. And in order for us to feel safe, we have to be able to trust the people who are in positions of power and people who are in positions of authority of us, and police being number one. You know, if something happens in my neighborhood, even with my husband, I don't think he would mind sharing this, but he was leaving a restaurant in our community, and a gentleman started following him, harassing him, tailgating him. And he ended up calling the police because he was coming home to bring us food, and he was afraid that this guy was going to follow him home. And, you know, I have to say, I paused a second when my husband said he called the police. And it is distressing that as a person of color, you would need to pause. We should all have equal access to the police. We should all have equal access to everything that is afforded to white Americans, which this country was initially built for. We should never hesitate as a person of color, as a person of different religion, as a person of a different sexual orientation, to take full advantage of everything that our community and our government is supposed to give us. And so I agree that there is a systematic racism throughout all our systems in government. I mean, that's historic, it's present. That's just the history of America. And we all need to work together, which is why I'm glad you've done this forum, Reverend Ray, for us to have this conversation, to have this dialogue.
Thank you, District Attorney. Now listen, and one thing you'll notice that about systemic racism, I mean, I have an amazing panel of brilliant people who have worked hard, educated, who are public servants. All of you are public servants. You serve the most impacted, and you serve the idea of good. But even that, with us being a people of color, does not inoculate us from situations that we are experiencing today. The idea of safety. So Maha, we'll transition into the next question about safety. I mean, Maha, so this question is for you. How do we find our way forward to keep our community protected and safe? And then continue the job where it calls us to engage with law enforcement. So how do we keep our community safe, and what do we need to do in relationship to doing a job to continue engaging with law enforcement to hold them accountable?
Yeah, so I personally think that it begins at the top. We need to imagine as leaders what kind of a city and a community we want to foster and live in, and then take steps to make that happen, both through the policies that we put in place and the sincerity with which we ensure that they're applied. As an anti-bigotry trainer, I often hear from the police that we train that they treat everyone with respect, and that must be the bar that is aimed for. Cultural competency begins at the top, and it's modeled by leadership and its interactions, both within and outside of the organization. But we also need structural changes that ensure that police officers respect all groups of people. I think cultural immersion programs go a long way in achieving that. And there have been a lot of studies that have been done about the impact and the effectiveness of these trainings, and the record is mixed. Some trainings are really effective, other trainings are not. So not all of the programs are equal. Our program, only the officers in the Muslim American community, but we also address the roots of biases and go through that history to address why people viscerally react to people in a split second. People react to me as a Muslim woman in hijab when I board a plane. And I can tell you a lot of stories about that. We also train on skills that they need to effectively interact with members of communities that they serve. Now, San Jose PD is one of those departments where I offered to have that training be held, especially after I heard about the case of the Arab law enforcement officer that complained about Islamophobic remarks being made to him. And I wish we had done it then. It didn't happen. And I'm glad that San Jose PD is now considering doing that training. But they are one of the few police departments where we haven't done this training for, and I've wanted to for a long time. I'd also like to see, this is sort of interesting. I'd also like to see impacted community leaders attending Police Academy for Citizens to build awareness and understanding of law enforcement work, while fostering respect and constructive engagement with law enforcement. I've done 2 police academies. I've trained hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers since 1995. I don't have the same relationship that Sajid describes. I think the vast majority of them are very good, decent people. There are absolutely bad apples, and I've experienced them in the classes that I've given, in some of the in how they've behaved towards me, and some of the things that they've said, some of the kinds of questions that have been asked, but they've always been the minority. And other police officers have jumped in and have defended me and other trainers that have done this training. So I don't have the same relationship or experiences that Sajid describes. Not to negate his experiences at all. I just wanted to sort of share my experiences. But as far as, as this particular case, the solution is obviously to follow through on the termination of the officers and to ensure that they will not be rehired. The second is not hiring officers with a bad record. Our police departments should reflect the communities that they serve. And one of the best ways to ensure that, in talking to my advisors, who are African-American Muslims, they've also suggested that we need to hire officers who live in the neighborhood. When everyone in the neighborhood knows the officer from childhood, it's much less likely that he or she will do anything that causes conflict. And finally, we absolutely need to change the culture of the so-called blue wall of silence. We need to create a culture where people are rewarded for being upstandards, not only to bigotry, but also to bullying. Some of these people that were on these Facebook posts were bullies. One of the officers threatened others to either be with them or against them. That sort of change is going to require systemic institutional change by the chief, by the city manager, that the chief reports to, and the mayor's office. So I think as we address the chief, I think we need to also address the city manager and the mayor's office.
Yeah, that's a huge share, Maha. Thank you so much. I'm echoing a little bit, so I don't know if you guys can hear me. I love the idea about policemen and women coming out of the communities which they police. A reimagining and recreating policing could be some of the defunding, the money that's taken out of, for example, the police being removed from the school systems. That money can be placed in cadet programs and mentoring programs for young men and women who are in high school, so that when they graduate from high school, they can go right into the academy after satisfying the qualifications to be police officers. That way they have a relationship. And in doing so, there is less complicit, there's less effects of being bullied to go along, to get along, to keep your job that
Right.
you have dreamed of, that you have the ability to support your family, many different components of that. So thank you for sharing. A great share, a lot of nuggets in that, a lot that we can take away. This next question is for Kalila and Sajid. You guys are in the courtrooms with officers, and you have in past had to defend and or oppose their statements. I could only imagine that in this environment with the revelation of the secret Facebook page, that makes your job all the more difficult these days. And trusting their testimonies. I mean, how do you deal? What adjustments do you need to make, or do you make any adjustments? Kalila, you could start and give us your ideas of, how do you move forward with this?
I think that Sajid would agree that when it comes to prosecuting cases, we work hand in hand in the regards that the DA is required to give over evidence. We're required to give over witnesses anytime a case comes up. We actually have a very innovative system in our office now that we're able to electronically send over discovery to the public defender's office, to the alternate defender's offices on the case, so that at arraignment, for the majority of cases, they will have that police report. They will be able to read over it. They'll know what the charges are, who are the officers on that. And if any officers have had any misconduct, there's also a list, which is called a Brady list and a Brady committee, and they will be notified of that as well. This is something that the criminal justice system has considered. Unfortunately, what occurred on that Facebook post isn't an anomaly. It has happened in DA's offices throughout this country. In 2016, I believe there was an incident of a police officer who also made some statements, and he was fired and went to arbitration, and he was rehired after making those statements. And what our office does is we look at who the officers are. If they've done anything that is considered misconduct, say, for instance, their testimony or the evidence in previous cases was untruthful, a judge found them to be unreliable, not credible, that would be disclosed. If they testifying on the stand, for instance, and they say something that is untruthful to the point of committing perjury, the judge would also make note of that. It will go to our office, there will be reported to their department. There'll be cases where if we feel that the evidence just isn't there based on the person who handled that case, it can go all the way to the point where that case is even dismissed. I've had a case personally where it wasn't in this county, but it was a weapons possession case, and it was just a car stop. The person had weapons in the car. The police officer arrested them. He was on the stand testifying, and the public defender came later to me and was just saying, hey, with the booking, later at the booking, the officer made some pretty racially inflamed statements about the ethnicity of the defendant in this case. And I just want to bring you up to the attention. It had nothing to do with the stop. It had nothing to do with the encounter at all, but it was just comments. He didn't realize his body-worn camera was still on, and those comments were captured. And what ended up happening was I stopped the trial and did not proceed forward with that, and ended up talking to the defense attorney and resolving the case. And that officer also was sent to the supervisor. And I think what Maha said is important, as well as the fact that body-worn camera policy is necessary throughout this country. We have it primarily in all of our departments that we, all the police officer departments that we work with when we are prosecuting a case, but it increases confidence in policing. As we all know, that police officers are human, just like we're human. And we may misjudge a situation. We may not remember accurately what happened when it was 30 minutes ago, an hour ago, 2 or 3 hours ago. But the body-worn camera footage, as we've even seen in cases in Atlanta and throughout this nation, it is key, just like cell phone data is, in getting a reflection of what's happening in that moment. Because it really does, I feel personally, it really does increase the confidence when we are prosecuting cases.
Definitely. And this whole idea, attorney, is of full immunity needs to be revisited. This whole idea of rehiring police officer being able to go through the POA and have arbitration and be suspended for 6 to 12 months, but find them their way back to being able to be a police officer. We need to revisit all of those things. Sajid, I mean, in the midst of the culture of policing, when we look at the Facebook posts, we get an idea that this is a culture. Maha mentioned that, you know, hey, listen, you got to do this. You don't have a choice. You know, so in the courtroom, having to defend and or support. I mean, how does knowing and having all of this knowledge and information make it challenging for you to do what you called to do, what you're trained to do?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity more than a negative challenge. It's an opportunity for our systems at play to do some introspection as it relates to how our criminal legal system works, specifically as it relates to these particular officers in the San Jose Police Department. It's an opportunity for the District Attorney's Office to retrospectively look at all cases that these officers have ever touched in any shape or form, to assess and evaluate whether or not these officers and their views impacted the constitutionality of particular searches and stops and investigations, and whether it impacted potential convictions in our county. So there's that retrospective demand that needs to be effectuated. And then prospectively, what I have seen in my 12 years as a public defender in this county is a tendency, and not just locally here, but across our state, is a tendency to believe and trust police officers. That comes across the board, from jurors, from community members, but it also permeates, from my vantage point, into our district attorney's offices, where the perspectives of the people that I represent are often ignored and dismissed, and in fact, sometimes even criticized, where the people that we represent are saying, hey, this police officer said a certain thing or acted a certain way that was unlawful or discriminatory or excessive, but that is kind of just shooed off or shushed, and there is a feeling or a culture where the police officers' views and their police reports are the holy grail. They said this happened a certain way, and that's how it happened, and that's kind of we're sticking with it. So I'm hopeful that this moment is a moment where prosecutors in Santa Clara County and across the state realize that and I'm not saying they don't do this already, but a further call to action to truly scrutinize the accounts of police officers, obviously utilizing body-worn cameras to ensure that they are telling the truth about what they're detailing in their police reports, making perhaps stronger decisions about whether to proceed forward with certain prosecutions when there may be questions about the legality or constitutionality of police officer conduct. And then ultimately, when there are police officers that engage in discriminatory policing or use excessive force or are engaging in unconstitutional behavior, that they not get a free pass, that they be held accountable in some shape or form. And that mandate extends through all layers of the system, from internally within the San Jose Police Department, from the community, from citizens holding them accountable, but then also from the DA's office holding them accountable by not prosecuting cases that involve questionable police tactics, by prosecuting police officers that use excessive force. We saw in the San Jose Mercury News the other day that San Jose Police Department has the highest number of killings attributed to it of citizens in our community in the Bay Area, 19 over the past 5 years, none of which have been prosecuted by the Santa Clara County DA's office. I'm not saying that wasn't justified or not, but perhaps we are, this is a moment to require greater scrutiny of police officer conduct and for greater accountability moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Safety and accountability. DA Spain, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond if you want, because we brought you in relationship to your department and some hopes and desires based on moving forward with prosecution. But to your point earlier as well, you mentioned body-worn cameras as a way of holding police officers more mindful and creating more accountability. But I'll give you the opportunity if you wanted to jump in and respond to anything that Sajid said.
Yes, I think what is happening throughout this nation, I mean, honestly, throughout this world, is really eye-opening for a lot of people in America, where they're finally realizing or recognizing that things have been their experience is actually valid and reasonable. And we're starting to see that response trickle down into policies and into changes. And what I can say is that Jeff Rosen is, who's the DA in Santa Clara County, he's open to our office providing ideas and suggestions. He's aware of the problem. Before COVID happened, I was actually one of the DAs that was going to go to Alabama. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. And it was a trip that Jeff Rosen had planned to take us so that we could see the Legacy Museum, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And things like that are so key, not just for this DA's offices, but for all DA's offices, and not just for district attorneys, but for police officers, and not just for police officers, for judges. I think that all of us need to be aware of how this system can perpetuate inequality. And so the body-worn cameras, we have this now, we turn it over, the DAs have to look at it. We have issuing where it's reviewed, and if it's a serious case, a serious crime, is reviewed by a panel, by a committee. We have an open policy in terms of discovery. But also, I think what's key is having this dialogue. And I think that Sajid would agree, it's the listening that's important, and not brushing off things that may be said. It's actually listening and maybe going that step further. So if an opposing counsel defense attorney comes to you and say, hey, my client made this statement, to go a step further and maybe investigate it, because the only thing that it would take is time. And I've had a case where I've had a public defender come to me and different cases and say, hey, I don't think that this is necessarily the right guy. Hey, I don't know if this witness is really being credible, or if they turned, if everything that happened was reported in this statement. And I've taken the time. And I know other colleagues do that as well. But what's key is that all of us start doing that on all sides and at all levels, because the only way that we can make sure that justice is actually served is if we take the time that we don't have injustice occur. And so in addition to what's happening with our body-worn camera, we have the Conviction Integrity Unit, which you had mentioned before. They are going to be the unit that's going to be investigating these police officers, the San Jose police officers. And it's currently in the investigation stage, but they're going to be doing a thorough investigation. This is not, this is going to be looking to see what happened, is going to be looking to see what the evidence actually shows. So nothing is being prejudged at this moment or at this stage. And we're going to make sure that they're going to be held accountable to the full extent of the law. Because what's important as a DA is that justice is actually served for the victims. In the case of the San Jose police officers, those victims are the community. as well as the victims, potential victims of any case that they have potentially been on. And so it's also important, and what's already currently occurring is cases of the officers that were involved are being pulled and being reviewed to see whether or not it could have had an effect and if it could have had an influence. But regardless, that case or that evidence, whatever may come of this investigation, will be turned over to the defense attorney so that they are aware and they can make any sort of motions or make any sort of recommendations. But I do agree that we can always do more. And I know that Rosen has reached out to all the DA's offices to get input on what else can we do? What more can we do?
Thank you for sharing. Mix, because what we do at PACT is we listen, we have dialogue, and we believe in doing so it leads to justice and equity and more fair policies for our county. So Maha, you've heard Sajid and Kalila talk about safety and accountability. So how will the impacted communities continue to engage and feel safe with police? Do you have a perspective based on what you've heard them share?
I was just listening. I'm still sort of reflecting on what Kalila was saying. You know, until these guys are fired, we're all paying for their mistakes. In any other environment, these people would have been fired, but until that happens, we're all paying for it. People like me that have worked so hard to build beloved communities throughout the Bay Area through the positive work that we do. And I'm just thinking of all of the work that's been done by the Board of Supervisors, the City Council members, all of us, people like Ray and other nonprofit organizations. My question is, why do we have to pay for this? If these people were working in corporations, they would have been gone already. The fact that they're still on is, or part of the force is it's a poor reflection, really, of the system. And this is where we might need, this is where we do need systemic changes, because they're allowed to keep their job and be paid as we're doing the investigation. How long is the investigation going to take? That's another question that I have on my mind. So a supervisor not too long ago asked me to comment or to give him feedback on reforms that he was recommending, and I didn't give him my opinion. And I told him this. I told him, and I'm saying this now to everybody, is that these issues really should be decided by all the stakeholders, which include the various impacted communities and law enforcement agencies. That would include the police, the DA, the public defender's office, sitting down together to achieve reform in law enforcement and the entire criminal justice system. And the reason I say this is because many of the decisions concerning these issues, I feel, are either made for political gain by one of the politicians, or to basically quiet down the protesters in reaction to an incident. And this is why they're not effective. This is why we keep repeating these problems. And so if we're serious about solutions and truly feel that there's an advantage to having peaceful, harmonious communities that would also be good for business, then the process of reform is going to take months and years and must be inclusive of all of the stakeholders to come up with solutions, long-term, impactful solutions for criminal justice reform that makes sense and that works for everyone. I think PACT is a great vehicle for that, Reverend Ray. And I wish that this is something that could happen in this county, in this community. As Sajid has pointed out, this is a moment in time where this gives us an opening, an opportunity for us to do this once and for all. If we're serious about this, then I think that that's what it's going to require. It's going to require everybody coming together and putting out, letting everybody know what actually needs to happen. And I am very confident in our ability to do that if we're sincere about doing it.
Reverend, can I respond if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Sure. I'm not going to speak about the legality of whether or not these police officers should be fired and whether or not that'll hold up. I mean, I'm not a free speech lawyer, and I'm not an expert on that. But even if there was a legal basis to fire these officers, and if they were to be terminated, I think that's only a strand of the solution here. As I reflected in my earlier comments, these police officers are not an anomaly. They are and their views are simply a manifestation of a larger cultural systemic racism that permeates policing in this city, this county, across the country. So simply firing police officers will not be the kind of end all be all solution, especially because we know that these views were being fostered in this Facebook group with other police officers, retired and current police officers, was very prevalent and known within the police department. And so it's something that needs, it's a structural problem that requires structural solutions, to what Maha was alluding to at the close of her comments. And so that's why reimagining, as we've talked about earlier, what this community can look like is really the call to action here, and what our community requires to be safe, and how we need to be policing our communities is the kind of the key call in this moment. And alluding back to what we talked about earlier, it requires from my vantage point, a real effort to defund the San Jose Police Department and police departments like it, and reallocating those funds, as you referenced earlier, Reverend Ray, to other community forums to help prevent crime in the first place, to create a more equitable community with greater access for all people in our community to access education, upward mobility, so that they are not marginalized, so they're not impoverished, so they're not on the fringes of our community, and they're not excessively policed. And then ultimately also reimagining how we respond to the various spectrums of human behavior, including drug addiction, mental health crises, schooling issues. We kind of have a one-size-fits-all process at this point, where we just respond with police officers, uniformed, badged, weaponized police officers, and reimagining what that community can look like when we respond with greater skill and greater wisdom to the variety of human behaviors that manifest in our communities. So just some thoughts I wanted to add and share.
No, those are great thoughts. And I love the point, Sajid says that firing, suspending doesn't change the system. It does make a community feel a little better, but that is just a temporary feel-good, quick fix solution. What's really going to change is reimagining, defunding, and refunding other areas within our community that build community, but really changing and fixing the system. So Kalila, we won't focus on the firing and the punitive nature, even though those things should happen. You already alluded earlier that you're looking into cases that were related to the officers involved in the Facebook group. Can you speak a little more about that? How long it will take to look at those cases, and what are some of the outcomes that could potentially happen?
You know, this is an ongoing investigation. And so it's hard to put a time limit or a time frame on it, but it is a priority. And so the outcomes that could happen is that if there are any pending cases, if any of this involves current officers and these cases are currently pending, then those cases potentially, if the conduct of that officer directly affects what the crime is, what occurred, then it could be anywhere from dismissal, and if it is also officers who have cases have already passed, that information could as well be given to the defense attorney, and they can bring any available motions. I think what's important is transparency of the system. Transparency in the process, and that's what we're doing in this matter. And so the most that I can say is that this is being taken seriously, it is being handled quickly, And any information as it comes to light and as the evidence is fully investigated, we're going to be making that known to all the available parties. And when the evidence is finished, when we finish the investigation, then there will be a statement made publicly as well.
Can I just say something really quickly? I think it would go a long way, Kalila, if this case was resolved sooner than later. I think it would do tremendous good to building trust, engendering faith in what system we have, as imperfect as it is. And I think that it would also drive people to sit around the table to have conversations alongside law enforcement for effective reform. So yes, I agree with Sajid, but I also know that I'm on a lot of lists where people say crazy, and I'm just too busy. I go through this stuff, and I'm just too busy to get out of every listserv that I'm on, where people say completely inappropriate things and completely racist things. And so I can't, I totally understand that there needs to be systemic change. I'm just not going to go to the place where I believe that everybody that was on that Facebook page is necessarily a racist just because a bunch of bullies were on that, on that post. But resolving this, I think, would go a very long way in building trust and support, and then also bringing people around the table to have a long-term discussion on the kind of criminal justice reform that I think Sajid has been talking about in his opinion pieces. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I strongly agree with you. The sooner, the better to resolve the issue will allow us to move forward beyond this pain, beyond this fear, and to begin to address our systemic system. Maha, you said something earlier. PAC is in a great position. I'll make the announcement later, but on July 19th, the PAC beloved community is going to be having an action with Mayor Liccardo with some demands that are relational to all of the things that we're talking about today. So stay tuned to that. All right, the time has been well spent. I'm so grateful for Kalila. I'm grateful for Maha and Sajid for joining. I just want one more last statement. You can give me 60 seconds relational to all what is best, and a best case scenario to achieving police reform and restorative criminal justice. So what's the best case scenario in achieving police reform and restorative criminal justice system? What do you think? We'll start with you, Kalila.
I think the best case scenario is that we really fulfill the statement that Martin Luther King stated, which was, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I think the best case scenario in reforming the system is that all parts equally work. We're supposed to hold each other accountable. That's why we have government paid public defenders. So if someone can afford an attorney, one is accorded to them, they're provided one. We have district attorneys, which represent the victims, which represent the community and hold the public trust. And then we have the judges who oversee the proceedings and make sure that the law is being upheld. And we have the community who is able to let us know, the defense attorneys, the public defenders, and even the judge, is this crime even worthy to be brought in front of us? Is this person guilty or not guilty? And we have the law officers, the law enforcement community. Their job is essential because they are the ones who investigate crime. They're the ones who are usually those first responders anytime someone is scared or frightened. But it all works hand in hand. It is like throwing a rock into a pond. There's ripples. And so we all have to do our part. I think what would be wonderful is if we can be in a world where everyone is treated equally and humanely, and that everyone is given a fair chance, and that people who actually harm others are held accountable. And I don't think that any of us would disagree that we all want to feel safe We all want to be able to go to work. We all want to provide for our families. We all want to worship how we worship, or whether we don't even worship at all. And we all want to be able to trust the people that we vote for and that are given the authority to enforce the law.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. We all want to feel safe, regardless of a faith or non-faith. We just want justice and equality and equity. Sajid, what do you have for us?
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize our place within the historical context of this country. So I think it's important for us to recognize that we live with a system of policing and a system of our criminal legal system, which is rooted in 400 years of the dehumanization of people of color, of Black people, of Indigenous people. And so I think there first has to be a very firm and affirmative recognition of and the roots that of our systems of policing and our systems of mass incarceration that are rooted in slavery, rooted in lynchings, rooted in police brutality. And ultimately it's rooted in the dehumanization of the other. It's rooted in the dehumanization of people of color. It's calling Black people 3/5 of the human being. And then it's manifesting now in these Facebook comments, you know, calling for hijabs to be turned into nooses. So ultimately the solution to this inhumanity, this history of inhumanity, is education about that history, and then ultimately a affirmative effort to honor the humanity of every person, but especially people of color, and especially Black people. That is the very basis of the Black Lives Matter movement, is to honor and affirmatively recognize the humanity of Black people in this country. And until their lives matter, the rest of our lives won't matter. And so my kind of where we're headed, best case scenario, is that where all of us honor the humanity of the people in our communities, but specifically seats of power honor the humanity of people in our communities, police officers with, and then in turn, district attorneys, judges, and attorneys like myself, public defenders, that where we insist upon and honor the humanity of everyone in our midst. But in particular, I think it's very important to never forget the humanity of people that have done bad things. People that have victimized our community are still human beings, and they deserve humanity. And when we recognize their humanity, we will see drastic changes in the way we police our communities and the way we respond to human behavior. And we'll see a deconstruction and a breaking down of our system of mass incarceration, because that system is rooted in the dehumanization of people that have done bad things, and particularly of people of color. And when we restore their humanity, that system will fall apart.
Thank you, Sajid. In my community of faith, all are redeemable, and I must be able to see myself as you, see the humanity in you. Now, I appreciate your perspective on the historical position of which we're in. I look at things as ignorance and malintent. I don't mind educating. I'm weary of educating, but for those who are non-willfully ignorant, I want to teach the historical content of why we are today. But then those who are malintent, as you said, Sajid, they're still human beings. So in order for me to give love, to receive love, I must give it regardless. So that is a great hope that we have for all. Last but not least, Maha, share with us.
I can't add any better than what you just said, Reverend Ray. I'm going to regurgitate what I said, what I said earlier about the importance of bringing all of the stakeholders together in this conversation of criminal justice reforms. A lot of people have, mentioned very specific policies. I am not, even though I have opinions about some of these policies, like defunding the police, abolishing prisons, and so forth. And, I don't have a lot of confidence until we get everybody together to have this conversation, both the impacted communities and all of the law enforcement agencies, the police, DA, and public defenders. and officers, because all of them are acting on our behalf, the citizens and the residents of this, of this community. Do we live in a racist society? Yeah, we do. Everybody knows that. America is a racist society. Law enforcement and all of these agencies are a reflection of that system. And so I think it goes beyond law enforcement. It goes beyond the DA's office, and I think it's really, the conversation is about us, which is why I'd love to see a process where communities can come together with law enforcement agencies to learn about each other. I think it's incredibly important to learn about law enforcement work. I was privileged to attend the police academies, 2 of them over a period of 4 to 6 months, to understand the environment that they're in. And they are responding to what we've asked for in law and order, which is a loaded term. I understand that it has a history, but they're also responding to the community's demand for law and order. And so I think it's important that we learn about each other, sit down and have this conversation in the entire criminal justice system for the long haul, for the long term. Until then, we're going to have politicians, responding to these issues for political gain, and with short-term solutions that really don't do anything. And so I would only be hopeful in that kind of a process moving forward.
Maha, that sounds like a beloved community to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, absolutely. So again, I want to thank all of you. Maha, you have the ING, the Islamic Network Group. How do we find you, and how do we stay in tune with your work?
You can reach us through our website, which is ing.org. We do educational presentations, seminars, panels, not just on Muslims, but also other faith groups, and with other, and we look at the intersection of religion and race, and why we also do work around anti-Blackness, anti-Latinx, and anti-Asian sentiments, and anti-Indigenous peoples as well, where we look at the roots of racism, going back to the formation of narratives during the colonial period, and how this gave rise to the idea of race, which is constructed, racialization, which leads us to implicit bias, and the systemic racism that we see today. And I absolutely believe that without that education, without that understanding of that history, we're never going to be able to overcome, why we react to women in hijab the way that we do. Why do we react to Black men the way that we do, and immigrant, Latinx and Asians and so forth. And so we do that kind of work, and we do it alongside our allies, because it's incredibly important to do it with other marginalized communities, not just Muslims working alone or working by themselves doing this work. So they can reach us on our website, and the email that I personally read is mail@ing.org. All of our work is available at no charge, because we're funded by several foundations that allow us to do that. And our training for law enforcement is actually certified by the state of California. It's 8 hours long for commanders and chiefs, and it's 2 and 4 hours for line officers, but some departments have actually asked for 8 hours for all of their officers, particularly after the incident with the Facebook page, and I was really happy to see that.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Ma. We're so happy to have you. Don't go yet. I always have to tell my guests, don't leave yet, because after we go offline, I at least want to thank you. Sajid, how do we find you and the work that you're doing?
Well, by day, I work at the Santa Clara County Alternate Defender's Office downtown, not too far from where Kalila works. And I am working from home these days, but virtually you can find me on Instagram and on Twitter at the Sajid A. Khan. And then also my blog is thesajidakhan.tumblr.com. And then as I mentioned at the top, I co-host a podcast with my colleague Avi Singh. It's called Aider and Abettor, and that podcast is on all the platforms you can think of, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and SoundCloud. So I'd love for people to reach out and connect with me either on social media or listen to the podcast or engage with me in my writing, and look forward to connecting with community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajid, and thank you for joining us. Now, Kalila, I know that you operate in shadows like me, but is there information that you want our listeners and our viewers to be able to find you or ask questions or follow the writings that you do?
Well, I try not to write too much, but you can always Google me, Kalila Spain. I do have a LinkedIn page, but that is about as much social media that I do. But otherwise, I'm a deputy district attorney. You can find my information, my phone number, my work email address if you go to www.sccgov.org. And you can also find other information that the DA's office is doing. What I always like to say when I get the opportunity to meet people is that I come into the picture, unfortunately, when something horrific has occurred or happened. You know, I always prefer to see people in a social environment or social situation. But if someone does have a question, they can, of course, come to the website, or they can reach out to me, and I will put them in contact with who they actually need to speak with if I can't answer.
Excellent, thank you. All right, as a reminder, as I mentioned to Maha, on July 19th, the PAC Beloved community will have an action where we will be meeting with the mayor, the chief, and other electeds and present demands relational to police reform and many different policies. So we want you to stay tuned, but save the date, July 19th at 2 p.m. We also want you to remind you, find 10 people today and ask them, have they completed their census? We want to make sure that they complete their census. The time for the census has been extended through October 2020. So we still have time. Our numbers look good in Santa Clara County, but make sure that you're completing your census. And of course, don't forget to register to vote. Be prepared. It may not be about the national election because California always votes one way, but how about your local elections? Your city and your county elections are just as important. When we talk about changing systemic change and racist policies, it starts at the voter's booth. So we want to make sure that you are registered to vote. And last but not least, yesterday, our great fund developer and communications person, Jen, along with our friends of PAC, announced our PAC 2020 Leadership Luncheon honorees. So you can go find that information on our PAC website and also on our PAC Facebook page. Today, we want to say happy birthday to the late freedom fighter, Medgar Evers. His home state of Mississippi has removed the Confederate flag. So we're very happy about that. We're having great wins, you guys. It's the tipping point. Things will never be the same. We must continue to demand change. I want to say happy 4th of July. So again, Maha, Kalila, Sajid, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And next week, we'll be back, same time, same place, as we seek to create a more just, diverse California and a stronger and more united, improved Silicon Valley and all of our cities here in Santa Clara County. So thanks again for joining us. Have a wonderful 4th and weekend.
Thank you.